The art of chess commentary has changed quite considerably. I've been commentating at the British since 1998, and for the vast majority of that time, the commentary has involved standing up in front of a live audience using demonstration boards. This is a true test of the commentator's art, as you have to deal with, the situation as it develops. Of course, we all know in recent years that chess commentary is far more now concentrated in, for instance, a studio. There's no live audience whatsoever. There isn't a great deal of atmosphere other than that which the commentators can create. I mean, there's some great commentators out there, there's no doubt about it, but I can't help but prefer the situation where you have a live audience, you've got the demonstration boards, and you've got to make the best of it. This is a more true test of the commentator's art from my perspective. This led me to thinking, what has been the best game that I've seen over the last 17 or 18 years as a commentator? I mean, there have been many great games, many best games of the tournament, but one which sticks in my mind is the one I'm going to show you today. It's the best game prize from Millfield back in the year 2000, and it's a game between Aaron Summerscale playing white and Mark Hebden. And what makes this game interesting is that both of these grandmasters are playing in the tournament at Warwick 15 years later, and of course that's a very nice thing to see. They might even be duelling in the same opening. Well, Summerscale was white, and he clearly decided on that day to confront Hebden in one of the main lines of the King's Indian defence. To my knowledge, Mark Hebden's still playing the King's Indian today. It's his staple fare when confronted with the Queen's Pawn or flank openings, and it will take an earth mover to shift him from this venerable opening. What we get here is the main line of the classical variation. White's aims are modest in the opening. He contents himself with a three-pawn centre. He castles, and he invites black to demonstrate counterplay. Well, black has several moves in this particular position. The old-fashioned move is just to play knight to d7. That's surprisingly unpopular these days. Perhaps it's considered to be a little too passive. A modern way is to put the knight on a6. Nothing wrong with that. And Hebden sticks to his favourite move here, knight c6, promoting a position where opposite sides' flank attacks are the order of the day. White generally in this position attacks on the queen side with the help of the move c5 at some point. Black, meanwhile, is thinking about kingside attack, and I think that's what Hebden likes about this variation. Black's going to move that knight away from f6 and play f5 as quickly as possible. Well, of course, in these variations where, one side's attacking the other guy's king, a lot of theory tends to develop. And if you know this position with black, you're going to have to know an awful lot of theory, because there are many moves that white can play. But Summerscale plays his favourite move, knight e1, the Mar del Plata variation. And black plays knight d7. Kasparov's favourite move here was knight to e8. But the idea behind knight d7 is to take a lot of the sting out of an old-fashioned variation where white went in with f4. Of course, not many people play this these days. But the idea is that black can take on f4 in this position and then plant his knight on e5. So knight d7, not a lot of difference between that and knight e8, apart from that small nuance. But of course, after knight e8, not many people go f4. So maybe that's okay for black as well. So knight d7, and again, white has quite a bit of choice here. He can play bishop d2, he can play knight d3, he can play f3. Summerscale plays bishop e3. That's Korchnoi's favourite move. And he continues with the Korchnoi idea here. f3, allowing black to advance the kingside pawns. And now white plays a4. Well, it's just a question of time before white gets the move c5 in. And the idea of a4 is to preface c5 with maybe a5 gaining space and then possibly knight to a4. Then white plays c5. This is a pretty cold-blooded idea because, of course, black's given a free hand on the king side. So black has to show how he's going to organise his kingside attack to best effect. Hebden, however, decides to play a6. Well, that's got some positive points to it. I mean, it stops white from advancing the a pawn all the way up to a6, and it also prevents knight b5, which could be awkward in certain circumstances. The drawback is that it bears the b6 square in certain variations. So that's why white gets on with his plan, and now he's very much thinking about putting his knight on a4 and getting on with this move c5. Once c5 is achieved, white's thinking of taking on d6 and then eventually planting that knight on b6. This seems a bit long-winded, but you know, black's still got to demonstrate what he's doing on the king side. And Hebden, being a very direct player, continues rather typically with rook f6 and then rook to h6. And after c5, he plays queen to e8. So this is very quick by black. Black's plan is very, very clear. The queen's coming out to h5. At that point, white will have to play h3. The knight will come to f6. And then there'll be some crunching sacrifice on h3 with the bishop. So already he's obliging white to defend extremely carefully. But of course, Summerscale, knowing this variation backwards himself, is able to defend carefully by just parking his king in the corner. Out comes the queen, and now white drops his bishop economically back to g1. No h3 yet. White wants to delay that move as long as possible because he's afraid of that sacrifice. So black brings the knight across to f6, and now there's a clear idea of playing g4. So you often see black playing h5 and then g4 in this sort of variation. Here, the black attack seems to be accelerated because he hasn't wasted any time on this move h5. He's just shunted all his pieces over to the king side. So how is white going to defend against this direct plan? Well, Summerscale played knight to d3. Just saying, well, I'm not afraid of your attack. I'm getting on with my own play. But it may be that this move is a mistake. And interestingly, the two players contested this variation a couple of years later in Bradford. Whereas Hebden went on to win this game, actually Summerscale won the game in Bradford. So it's worthwhile seeing that game now to see what the differences are. Now we recall at Millfield, Summerscale played knight d3. At Bradford he played a better move. He played c takes d6 and was very direct himself, putting the knight in on b6. And the idea of this is that white simply wants not to take the rook here. He wants to take that bishop. And this is a very significant gain for white. What it means is that white is now able to play h3 as a defensive move because there's no sacrifice anymore. It's interesting that he can take this rook, but I think after that black was intending the crunching move knight h5. That was the point in putting the queen on h4, and it's getting difficult for white suddenly. You can see the advantage black has in retaining his light square bishop. So in this game, Summerscale had Hebden from Bradford. White lopped off the bishop. Black recaptured, and now white played h3. Black went in with g4, and now bishop f2. Queen to g5. White took on g4. You see, all these moves have got to be very precise by white. You can't play this variation, in my view, without knowing a great deal. Knight takes e4, and now an excellent move by white, rook to a4. This really is a model game by white in this variation, so it will be up to black to show improvements on this game. Hebden dropped his knight back. White played bishop f3. Black jettisoned the e-pawn in order to get his pieces active. White took the pawn. Black took on g4. Knight to f3. White's getting control suddenly. Queen to h5, and now this move rook to b4. Excellent play by white. Hebden played knight f5. Summerscale took it off. There was a recapture, and now rook takes b7. It's interesting that this absence of the light square bishop makes all the difference to black. He can't get through to the white king. So Hebden tried knight e3. White took it off as he had to. The knight came to d4. Queen e4, and now a beautiful move. Rook takes g7 check. Well, I mean, it's obvious, but no less pretty for that. king to h8, and now knight takes h6. Excellent stuff. He can even allow the move e2 in this position. The queen came to e1. Obviously, black can take off on f1, but then white recaptures, and as you can see, very difficult to stop the white attack. So after queen g6, as played, knight f7 check, king to g8, knight to h6 check, king to h8, and in this position, black decided to resign. So going back to the game, Summerscale versus Hebden at Millfield, white played knight d3, and let's see the differences now. Hebden played a splendid move, knight f takes d5, and I wonder whether white saw that. It's a bit of a bone crusher because white can't actually take that knight. If he takes, the other black knight finds a route to f5, and knight g3 check is a crunching threat. Once again, we see the role of this light square bishop, because if the move h3 is ever played, bang, the bishop sacrifices. I'm thinking of a line where white plays bishop f2, there's a check, so we take it, we recapture h3, well there we are. That's the sort of thing I mean. Going back to the game then, queen to b3. And it's interesting because if you know the King's Indian, you understand this knight on e7 is often black's problem piece in classical variations. Black struggles to get that to a good square. If you play this line with black, you've always got to look out for how to improve the lot of that knight. Well, Hebden's found a very nice way to do it. Summerscale played queen to b3. Pinning the knight, black parked his king in the corner. White still can't take it, knight f5 is too strong. White took on d6. Black recaptured, and in came the knight. But of course the difference is this time black's got this knight on d5, and that enables him to deal with the attacking comfort. Queen takes b6. And now queen to e8. And now the game takes on a very different turn, because the complications have resulted in a win of a pawn for black. So now it's a question of how black consolidates rather than how he mates white. I think the whole tenor of the game has changed. So firstly, Summerscale tries to nail down the light squares in the centre, but Hebden's having none of it. He pushes forward, attacking the queen. The queen moves, and black pushes forward again. Now the extra pawn really does start to show its strength, and on top of everything else, that bishop on g1 is now blocked in. White took the file, black brought his bishop out, very good, and white put his knight in on d5. Of course, if he takes on b7, then black goes rook b8, skewering the queen to the knight. So the knight came to d5. I think that's got to be removed. And en passant, black gets rid of his pesky, awkward knight. White recaptures. And now the simple rook b8. Just dealing in consolidation rather than any sort of tactical play. Of course, white will claim he's got some compensation here because he manages to establish a light square blockade in the centre. So the rest of this game really is revolving around whether black can break that light square blockade in the centre. And after that, hopefully get his pawns moving. It's all about black getting this pawn chain moving in the centre. Can he do it? Well, this is what Hebden's trying to achieve. So, bishop d6, queen b6, queen d8. Black will be very happy if the queens were to be exchanged. White's not having any of it. g4. So, this is a two-way move. There's the threat of resuming hostilities against the white king. There's also the idea of undermining the light squared blockade in the centre. White took the pawn. I suppose black could play queen g5 immediately, but he elects to play the straightforward move, bishop takes g4 first. Rook comes to c2, and Hebden brings his queen out. White doubles up on the file, and now bishop to f5. White tries to maintain the blockade of e4, but with no pawn on f3 to help him, this is going to be, I think, in the end, an impossible mission. And Hebden now masses in the F file, getting ready for a capture on e4 and then f3. And with f3 imminent, you begin to wonder whether white can stop it by putting his queen there. He didn't do this in the game. But I think after that, bishop b4, the so-called bad King's Indian bishop, comes to life in a completely different location. And this ruins white's coordination because he can't play rook e2 because of bishop g4. And if he moves the rook off the e file, well, then we can take on e4 and go f3. So I think after rook hf6, white is probably losing this position. I mean, he tries bishop f2, but now comes another excellent move by Hebden, f3. That's the move black has been looking to play all along. White has to take with the pawn. Now black finds the right moment to take on e4. Queen takes e4. Rook f4. There are little nuances all the way through this game, and that's what attracts me to it as one of the absolute best games I've seen at British Championship. So white plays rook g1, black plays queen h5, white plays queen to e2, and now black chooses the simple way, queen takes f3 check. It's hard to see after the exchange of queens how white is going to stop those central pawns. Yet the computer suggests rook takes f3 may be better. And the idea is that after bishop e1, we can play another computer move, e4. I mean, that's the type of move when you're winning that you really don't want to play unless you're absolutely convinced it wins 100%. But the computer will show with beyond doubt that after queen takes pawn, rook h3 just wins. Yes, allowing white to take on e5, but of course h2 is the big problem. And white can't defend himself. There's no defence. Queen takes d4, bishop e5, queen f2. Once again, the computer shows the way. We chop that pawn on h2. Everything comes off. We take on d5 check. Well, what can white play? I mean, you know, over the board, maybe this sort of thing could be a little bit awkward to win. Well, again, computer shows precision. In comes the queen, pinning the white rooks up, and now h6. A very nice move, making room for the king to come to h7. And now once the king's safe, black can resume his attack. For instance, if king h2, queen h5 check, the king has to wander out. Rook f3 checkmate. Okay, very difficult to see that over the board. We can't blame Mark Hebden for not playing rook takes f3, but that's the type of thing which computers have helped us to see. Just going back once more, let's run that variation one more time. Rook f3, bishop e1, e4, very nice. Queen takes e4, rook h3. Can he defend with queen e2? Well, then I think queen takes d5 check is good. Rook g2, and of course rook takes h2. Or bishop takes h2 for that matter. Probably that's the strongest move. So going back to the game itself, this is by no means a blemish. Queen takes f3 is not a blemish because, as you can see, the central pawns are more or less unstoppable. It just takes a little bit of technique to get them to advance at the right moment. So d3 was answered by rook c3 and now h5. A very nice move, another decoy, decoying the bishop away from the h2 b8 diagonal so that black can play e4. And this is now completely losing for white. He tried rook d1 in the game. If he had tried to exchange off the bishops, we take, we check, and now rook to d8. There's no rush to get those pawns going. They can advance at any time. It's a simple question of mopping up now, and at the end of this line we see the black rooks in full flow, whereas the white rooks are more or less ineffective. So rook to d1, rook g8 check, king h1, and now Hebden finds the right moment to advance. Rook takes pawn, e2, a move that concluded this splendid game. Well, I don't know if that's the best game I've seen over the last 16, 17 years, but it has to be one of the best. And the reasons is that both players gave everything that they got. And that's the type of play we're expecting at Warwick in 2015. Good luck to all the players, and I hope you'll join me on the ECF YouTube channel for daily games of the day and live action. See you in about a week's time.